The early signs of Ben Johnson's culture setting in at Chicago Bears training camp are exactly why you can be confident that things are going to be different this time around with this regime.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to dive into some early examples of how the culture around the Chicago Bears under Ben Johnson is already looking different, and we're seeing some of the early fruits of that labor of trying to instill an organizational mentality that corrects a lot of the mistakes of the Matt Eberflus era. So we'll hear about the hard coaching that Caleb Williams and the offense are receiving and some of the give and take there and what that's been able to instill in these guys so far, as we keep hearing reports of just how sort of vocal Ben Johnson has been at training camp practice. But we'll also hear about accountability for the coaches and Ben Johnson taking some of the blame on himself when things aren't going well at practice, and how that trickles down to the rest of the coaching staff, and how Ben Johnson's trying to build this to not just be a bunch of yes men telling him everything that he wants to hear. But I think this is most relevant at the player level. And the early signs we're seeing from Caleb Williams and the rest of the offense responding to Ben Johnson is exactly what we've been looking for, and a clear sign of that, like the message is being well received and setting in. Because throughout the first week plus of training camp so far, right, we've all seen the videos and heard the reports about Ben Johnson yelling at guys, and if you're not lining up right, just pulling them out of that drill and replacing them and just getting somebody back out there to make sure that, hey, it is done right and there is a standard that we're not going to compromise on. To not just say, oh, well, okay, one little detail here or there, not that big of a deal. It's like, no, we want this to be done a certain way, and until you do it a certain way, you're not going to get repeated opportunities to make those same mistakes over and over again. And so that type of hard coaching is something that we heard the players saying they wanted more of and that they weren't getting enough of from the previous regime under Matt Eberflus. And no one, I think, has been more central to that than Caleb Williams, who has wanted the coaching and has complained about not being coached enough from the previous team. And so Ben Johnson has put a lot on Caleb Williams' plate. He's pushing him really hard in a lot of ways. We've seen Caleb struggle at times as a result of everything that they're putting on his plate. But from a culture standpoint, Ben Johnson is seeing that turn in Caleb and seeing him embrace this and sort of embody how the coaches are pushing it on them to really kind of take it upon himself and take a lot of ownership in the offense and in this system. So it's an interesting conversation here from Ben Johnson about the idea of, like, yeah, you want to be really hard on Caleb, but you can't just be yelling at him and hard on him all the time. Like, there's got to be some give and take there and some positive reinforcement for the things he does well. And I think Ben Johnson has a really good read on Caleb and the best way of going about this situation.
How do you stay cognizant of being very demanding on him, being very hard on him, but then also pushing the right buttons so that he feels a little bit of that support throughout the long stretch of camp?
Yeah, it's. I think the way he was raised was one that was pretty demanding. I don't think you become the number one recruit in the nation without being pushed to a certain degree. So he's used to that, and I think he likes it. We've had those conversations. He knows what's coming, and we're getting to the point now where I don't even have to say as much. He's as hard on himself as I'm being on him, and he's disappointed when we're not spitting the plays out in the huddle the way we should, or we're not taking the proper drop, or our eyes aren't in the right place. And so he's getting to that point where it's more self-correction, and we're off and running from there. So I'm really excited about where he's at mentally, though.
You feel like you have to give him occasional pats on the back just to keep him.
There's no question about it. Yeah. He came up to my office on that player day off, and we highlight what he's done well over those first 4 days and areas that he needs to improve for the next 4. And we'll do the same thing on Friday.
To me, this is a really key step in the culture setting in, right? It's not just coaches saying and kind of dictating down to players like, this is how we're doing it, this is how we're doing it, this is the standard. But like once it reaches that level of, well, now the players have taken it, heard it, and internalized it, and now are sort of living it and taking ownership of it, right? When Ben talks about Caleb self-correcting and Caleb being the one who's maybe just as disappointed as Ben Johnson is when things go wrong. Like that is true buy-in at that point where you're no longer like, not that you're trying to convince players along the way, but they're no longer like just hearing it and taking it in, but they're sending it back out themselves by taking that ownership of it. And it's almost where Ben doesn't need to be as harsh or as stern or as strong on Caleb about things because he's already seeing Caleb take it for himself and be just as disappointed. So then Ben Johnson can, not that you like get lax and just let him get away with stuff, right? But it's sort of this give and take of like, we're pushing really hard. Now we can push a little less hard and kind of ease off a little bit because you're seeing the player kind of take the reins of that. And not that Caleb, Caleb's always been someone who's been hard on himself and pushing himself. But I think when you talk about taking ownership of like the specific details of what Ben Johnson is asking of him and what the offense is asking from everybody, right? Like once a leader on the offense, like your quarterback starts doing that, right? Then that starts to spread even more to all of the rest of the players. It kind of flows from like coaches to leaders to, rank and file roster members. And that's where you really permeate a culture and not just be the coach telling everybody what to do, but the players being really bought in. And I feel like we didn't get as much of that during the Eberflus era in terms of like players were going along with the hits principle and saying a lot of the right things in that regard, but I don't know, were they policing themselves on the hits principle, or was it always, well, we get to the film room and then they point out when we weren't hustling enough and all that stuff, right? Like I think there's a certain amount of like player-led leadership and organization here that is the culture. And now, of course, you have to make sure that at least from our perspective on the outside, like it only works if it's a good culture, like if it's an effective culture. Like, yes, the culture is permeating, and as long as that culture is quality, that'll be a great thing. But I think even as like Eberflus culture started to permeate a little bit more, it didn't have enough, say, accountability with it. It seemed like more so for the coaches, but also to some extent for the players. And that's the other aspect of Ben Johnson's culture that we're seeing the early rewards and fruits of. And so I want to go through where we're seeing coaching accountability in this that I think is going to really mean a lot to the players on this roster in particular next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever wish that managing your money felt a little easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. I have the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I use it almost every single day because it's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. I used to have to go into my bank account app and then my credit card app and then my retirement account app and then my investments app just to get a good picture of where my finances stand. It's 4 different logins and 4 different times just trying to get one clear picture. But with Monarch Money, you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control over your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's MONARCH, Monarch Money. Code Locked On NFL for half off your first year. So the players are starting to take ownership and some of their own self-policing accountability. But even beyond that, it's also about the coaches being accountable. And that was one of the major flaws and recurring themes from the Matt Eberflus era that we're already seeing significant improvement from Ben Johnson and company. Because there were so many times when things would go wrong for the Bears, and Eberflus wouldn't necessarily say, oh, this isn't our fault per se, but it was so often about, hey, players got to execute better. They got to go out and execute better. They got to try harder. They have to do X, Y, Z. Or he'll say, and we all have to do X, Y, and Z, right? But it was never like, hey, it was rarely, I'll say, and I don't want to say never, because I think there were occasional times when Eberflus would say, that's on me, I'm the head coach. But it was very, very rare. And even in moments where it seemed pretty clearly to be the head coach's fault, he would still defend it. Like, I think about the end of the Hail Mary game against the Commanders when he doesn't call timeout the play before the Hail Mary, and like he stuck his foot in the ground and said, no, like I don't regret that at all. Like there's no regrets, nothing he would change there. And even I feel like we got some aspects of this like towards the end when things went wrong against the Packers on the blocked field goal, or they lose in overtime against the Vikings, or the thing that ultimately got Eberflus fired against the Lions and not using timeouts late in that game. Like maybe at the very, very end in the Lions game, I think he was willing to admit a little bit more of like, hey, I probably screwed that up. But throughout that whole process, right, it kept being like, no, here's the situation and here's why I did what I did. And I remember us talking in this very podcast about where it's like, in those situations, you just got to read the room. Like, even if at those times Matt Eberflus genuinely believed he didn't do anything wrong, you still don't say that. You just have to know that leadership and accountability in a locker room is, whether you believe it's your fault or not, you say, hey, that's my fault. No one else's fault. I'm the leader. I'm the head coach. I'm in charge. It's my fault. You just have to take that blame, and you have to at least say it, right? Even if you don't fully believe it. And so like even under Eberflus, even in the most extreme examples of things that went catastrophically wrong, there wasn't that type of accountability. And so it's particularly refreshing when we fast forward to Ben Johnson and when things are a tiny bit wrong, even just, in insignificant ways in the grand scheme of the season. And Ben Johnson is still very quick to say, hey, that's on me. I have to do a better job for these little things. Because there was a practice, I think, so as this podcast is coming out Friday morning, Ben Johnson gave this quote on Thursday, and it was referring to then Wednesday's practice was one that was a little bit, I don't necessarily want to say sloppy, but sloppy is probably a part of that. A little bit lower intensity and just not something Ben Johnson was super thrilled with. So you'll hear like I spliced together two different answers from two different questions that weren't necessarily back to back in real life, where he talks about being kind of disappointed in practice and some of the details not being done, but then coming back around and being like, hey, yeah, that's on me. That's my fault. I needed to do a better job.
There were a number of things day 2 install of Red Zone that our details weren't quite there as a passing unit. And so I was pretty disappointed with the practice yesterday as a whole. Just you have to be very precise down there to have success in the passing game, in my opinion. And it wasn't where it needed to be. So I had no problem with that throw, that decision. High back 5, absolutely right. Yep, where it's us or nobody. But there's a lot of details that we needed to clean up in that entire practice.
Ben, you said you were disappointed in the practice yesterday. Was that an effort issue, a execution issue?
Execution, 100%. And like I told the skill players on offense, it was more so. I'll fall on the sword on that one. I didn't do a good enough job installing those plays for them to come out and look the way that they looked offensively.
See, it's so refreshing to hear that, because right, we're not talking about a big gaffe that ruined everything and he's saying, hey, my bad. It's like, no, my practice was a little sloppy. I probably didn't teach that well enough. That's on me. Like, because like you can imagine the Matt Eberflus alternative in a sense where it's like where like what I'm about to describe doesn't sound that horrible, but the accountability version that Ben Johnson said sounds better, where it's like Ben Johnson could have come out there and said, yeah, I was disappointed in practice. You know, we're on about number 6 of our 12 installs is about where they're at right now. And so, you know, they're still learning. It's new stuff for them. So we should expect some mistakes and some details still being missed, but we got to be better about that. Like they got to be on top of that. We need them to be more advanced in that. But we understand that they're still learning. It's a new thing, and it's just, you know, we're still halfway through all of our installs, but we'll get it better. Like that doesn't. You're not throwing the players under the bus there, but that's not accountability, right? It's Ben Johnson saying, "Hey, I need to teach it better." Like, yeah, they didn't execute it well enough, but why didn't they execute it well enough? Well, because I didn't teach it well enough. If I had taught it better, then they would have been able to execute it better. Because like you said, it wasn't an effort thing. And so where else, if you're Ben Johnson, can you point the fingers, but then at yourself? And it just feels like when we heard Matt Eberflus talk about execution being part of the problem, it was never followed by a, that means I need to teach it better, right? Execution being the problem was always sort of implying that, hey, the players aren't doing it good enough. Like, we're giving it to them and they're screwing it up was always what the implication was. It never said that part out loud, but the implication was always like, hey, they got to execute better. It's like, hey, we did our jobs as coaches. We told them what to do and they did it poorly. And Ben Johnson says, well, listen, if I told them what to do and they still did it poorly, then I didn't tell them what to do very well because they weren't able to do it very well. Like, at the end of the day, these are talented top 1% of all football players in the world, right? These are all extremely hardworking, dedicated individuals who have spent their whole lives trying to be the best at what they do at their individual positions. So it's not as though you're giving them something, you're not asking them to do something that they aren't capable of doing, but you have to instruct them in a way so that they can use their individual skills and work ethic to apply to the specific set of criteria you're presenting them and do it effectively. And that's that connection there between coach saying and player doing. It's like coach knows and player knows, but you have to like connect them, right? Coach knows what he wants from them, and the players know how to do just about anything on a football field, but the coach has to be able to properly communicate to the player the specific things he wants them to do and how they can do it. The players have all the skills to do anything the coaching staff will ask of them, but the coaching staff has to know how to ask it of them in a way that can properly communicate to them what they need to do and how they need to do it. And Ben Johnson taking accountability on day 7 or 8 of training camp practice, whatever it is, taking accountability for that now is like such a small thing that I think represents this accountability culture really taking hold and being more than just like intro press conference. Hey, here's what we're going to do different. Like, this is walking the walk in addition to the talking the talk that we got when he first came in and said, hey, we are going to have more accountability. Now we're seeing what that looks like. And I can only imagine for the players how refreshing that is when it's like, you had a bad practice and you probably heard it from your coaches in the meeting rooms and they're saying, hey, like, this is not a good practice. But then to hear the coach go out and take the blame for that publicly has got to be such a relief and a refreshing, just a breath of fresh air around there. Because it's not like the players know they messed up too, right? Like the players don't hear Ben Johnson say, oh, it was just Ben Johnson's fault. I didn't do anything wrong. Like, it's not that either. It's the perfect balance of like, hey, coaches got to have some accountability. If they're going to be hard on the players, they got to be hard on themselves too. And that's something that Ben Johnson is really looking for from his coaching staff. And he's trying to be intentional about setting that up on the front end too, so that they don't look back and say, oh, wait a minute, we missed a bunch of stuff because no one was willing to speak up or speak out or push back against any of this. So I want to talk about a little bit and hear from Ben Johnson on how he's trying to work through this with his coaching staff of some guys he knows and some guys he's working with for the first time. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. It's time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. You've had the transfusion drinks before? Well, the 5-Hour Energy version brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of that favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, all into a quick, energizing shot. So whether you're sinking birdies, or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Whether golf is your thing or not, sometimes you just need that extra energy boost to stay a little bit more sharp and a little bit more engaged. And the grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of that clubhouse go-to without having to chase down the bev cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use our promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your first order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-hour energy shots today. So there's the accountability at the player level with Caleb Williams and company taking some ownership for themselves. There's accountability from the head coach saying, hey, this is my bad. But he's also looking for accountability from his assistants and coordinators. And I really like how Ben Johnson is being intentional about making sure the coaching staff has an ecosystem of accountability and individuality, and not just being a bunch of yes men who will go along with whatever head coach says, because I wouldn't want to make him mad and risk, losing my job or whatever that might end up being. Because this is one of the sort of hidden undercurrents of this Ben Johnson beginning of the regime that I've been trying to sort of keep tabs on here based on how things went poorly with Matt Eberflus, where when Matt Eberflus came in, he built his coaching staff, his offensive staff at least, was full of guys he had never worked with before, right? Never worked with Luke Getsy as the offensive coordinator, never worked with the quarterbacks coach, the running backs coach, the wide receivers coach, the offensive line coach. It was a whole staff of guys that also had never worked together. They took in a bunch of different people with a bunch of different backgrounds, and we all understand that it's a great idea because now you have a bunch of different perspectives, and it's not just like under Matt Nagy, of course, everyone, it was all Andy Reid stuff in Matt Nagy's experience. So they only knew how to do the Andy Reid offense, and there was some issues there as they tried to sort of branch out, and there was disconnects with Mark Helfrich and then Bill Lazor, right? It was kind of a messy situation there. So I like the idea of having a variety of perspectives in there, but then also under Eberflus, you could get some of the too many cooks in the kitchen and lack some cohesive identity in there, because everyone's got different ideas and there's not as much natural alignment between how guys think and how guys work together. And so with Ben Johnson's coaching staff, that's something I've been wanting to watch and balance out between the idea of you can have the too many cooks in the kitchen and too many different ideas, or you can go the other way and have a bunch of Lions guys that are all just going to do whatever Ben Johnson says. We worked with him in Detroit. This is how we did it in Detroit. So we're just going to do it the Detroit way here. And so Johnson has kind of mixed some of those different aspects together on this staff, where on the offense he has Lions quarterbacks coach JT Barrett and wide receiver coach Antoine Randall L, and some other assistants lower down on the coaching depth chart there that came with him from Detroit. He's got some of his guys that he's familiar with, and then he's got some outside guys he's never worked with before, like Eric Bieniemy with the running backs, or Dennis Allen as defensive coordinator. And even Dennis Allen's staff has some guys you know and some guys you don't. Al Harris comes over from the Cowboys, who hadn't really been a part of this staff before, or the linebackers coach comes over from the Colts, who hadn't been a part of these staffs before, but they have some connections there. And then you've got the returning special teams coordinator, Richard Hightower. So when you build a coaching staff with some new guys and some familiar guys, you worry a little bit about, or I worry, I guess, a little bit about, do you have some of an us versus them mentality? Do you have, guys who are Ben Johnson's boys versus other people's boys? Or do you have the new coaches saying, I got to agree with Ben Johnson because, he's the head coach, we got to follow him? And Ben has been very intentional with setting up his coaching staff to say, hey, no, I don't need a bunch of yes men. I want us to do whatever's right for the team, whether that's my idea, your idea, or somebody else's idea. Let's just get the best idea forward. So here's how he's describing the idea of trying to set coaches up so that they can hold him accountable and that everyone can speak up on whatever they feel is right.
We talked to Dia yesterday. He's a defensive guy. He had a sentiment that kind of seemed like he would like to go live a little bit more. You guys have done a little bit of that. But how do you go about the process when you think this, another guy thinks that, and you get to finally say, what's that then?
We meet as a staff every night, and we go over what we're looking to do, not just the next day, but also big picture view. And so we're all on the same page, and I like to take the thoughts. I told that staff when we came back from the summer that I need a bunch of truth tellers around me. I need guys that aren't going to tell me what I want to hear, but are going to tell me how they see it. And then at the end of the day, I'll be able to assess the information and make a decision, and we'll go with it. And that's been the course so far.
I think a lot of this, for me, comes down to how Ben Johnson structured the experience of his staff, right? Where you have a defensive coordinator in Dennis Allen who has been a head coach before. He's going to be less afraid to speak up because he's been a head coach before, right? Or you have assistants on your offensive staff like Press Taylor and Eric Bieniemy who have been offensive coordinators before. So they're going to be less afraid of speaking up to a first-time offensive coordinator in Declan Doyle or a first-time head coach in Ben Johnson, right? You've got these different layers of guys at different levels with different experience that can empower them to maybe say more than a running backs coach would normally say, or say more than a defensive coordinator might normally say in other situations, especially when you've got a first-time head coach and first-time offensive coordinator that might need a little bit of extra guidance in some of those different areas. So I think it's a really nice balance there that requires some people managing. I mean, you could imagine there could be some resentment if, somebody like Bieniemy or Press Taylor looks at first-time offensive coordinator Declan Doyle and thinks, oh, he's doing some stuff wrong because this young kid doesn't know what he's doing. I've been the coordinator for a long time, right? You gotta kind of watch all of that, and the people management of the staff is an aspect of Ben Johnson's job that doesn't get talked about very much, and I think is important for us to keep an eye on, and also hard for us to keep an eye on. But it does feel like it's a good contrast to, like, I'll again go to Matt Eberflus, right? When he's the defensive coordinator, first-time head coach, or he's in charge of the defense, I should say, but he hires a defensive coordinator whose name is escaping me, the one who got fired for reasons we still don't fully understand, and I can picture him, but I can't think of the name of him. But a first-time defensive coordinator, and I'll find his name in a second. I'm sure you're listening to this right now going, you're yelling his name out. But I'm Alan Williams. That's who it was. He had never been an NFL. Actually, he might have been a defensive coordinator earlier in his career, but an inexperienced coordinator, and then a first-time offensive coordinator in Luke Getsy, right? So you have a first-time head coach who does defense, and the guy he hired to work the offense is a first-time offensive coordinator. So, like, the person you're putting in charge of a whole other side of the ball is also learning it on the fly. And so there was a lot of room for mistakes and errors just from a lack of experience from guys on that coaching staff that caused some problems. I think that's probably why he opted for a more experienced offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron, and that didn't solve any of the problems either. So, because the culture was already kind of damaged and broken there anyway, and you had to get new coordinators. And yeah, there were so many red flags along the way that somehow we kept moving forward with and had to put up with for far too long. But the point being, like, you can see and hear some of the differences in how Ben Johnson is approaching it. And just because it's different doesn't mean it's guaranteed to be successful, but it certainly means it's guaranteed to be different from how things went with Matt Eberflus. And I just feel like at every step along the way so far, we've seen Ben Johnson checking the boxes that we've wanted to see and hear. And that's really all we can ask for when it comes to off-season OTAs, minicamp, and now into training camp. Like, you can't tell if this is actually going to be as successful as we want it to be just yet, but we're not really seeing any red flags along the way, and that's as much as we could possibly hope for. And then just keep looking, keep watching for, hey, does anything seem off? Or does anything seem less than we expected it to be? Or are we overlooking anything, or looking for confirmation bias on any of this stuff? Like, I'm trying to be as attentive to that as we can, because we've bought into head coaches before that seemed like they were different and turned out to not be different. But every step along the way with Ben Johnson, it really does feel like it. And so at some point, the PTSD will wear off and we'll be able to lean into it a little bit more and fully buy in and enjoy it. And I think every step of the way gets us closer and closer to that. I'm excited for what this season's going to bring and what this coaching staff is going to be able to do. You can be sure we'll keep close tabs on the Bears culture and all this stuff all throughout training camp, the preseason, and the regular season. So make sure that you're subscribed to Locked On Bears on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Don't forget to tune in to our live streams we've been doing now every week, the Bears Squad Show. We're doing them Tuesdays and Fridays right now, and then we'll be live after Bears preseason and regular season games in the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. breaking down all the biggest Bears topics. I think we're still locking in times, but I think Fridays at 2 o'clock and Tuesdays at 4 o'clock is the current time. But then once the games start, we're probably going to drop the Friday and just do post-game. So it'll be a Tuesday and a post-game live streams on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. So make sure you tune in for those. I believe then the audio and video will be posted afterwards. If you can't catch us live, totally fine there. We're getting some different voices involved, including myself, talking Bears on Locked On Bears. And in the meantime, I hope that tuning into Locked On Bears and making us your first listen every day helps make it just a little bit easier for you to bear down.